On a cold December night in 1986, a young woman's life was tragically cut short, leaving a community in fear and a mystery that would take years to solve. A young sailor, barely out of his teens, would find his life turned upside down, convicted of a crime he didn't commit.
A 24-year-old barmaid has just been found dead on an area of wasteland known by the locals as Mary Row, situated across from Lake Road here in Portsmouth. Police say she was killed between the hours of 12:30 and 1 a.m. on the 9th of December.
This is a tale of tragedy, perseverance, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Welcome to the Linda Cook case, a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. Linda Cook, a vibrant 24-year-old barmaid, Linda was a familiar face in Portsmouth's lively pub scene. With her friendly smile and easygoing nature, she was well-liked by locals and sailors alike. Linda had recently moved in with her boyfriend's family on Victoria Road North. It was a new chapter in her life, full of hope and possibilities, but fate had other plans for this young woman. On the evening of December 8, 1986, Linda went about her day as usual. She spent time with her boyfriend's mom, Linda Gray, chatting and making plans. Around 11:30 p.m., she decided to pop over to a friend's house on Sultan Road. It was a short walk, one she'd made many times before. Little did Linda know that this would be her final journey. As the clock struck midnight and a new day began, Linda said goodbye to her friend and started her walk home. The streets were quiet, most people tucked away in their homes or the local pubs. Linda never made it back to Victoria Road North. What happened next sent shockwaves through the community. In the early hours of December 9, on a patch of wasteland known as Mary Row, Linda's life was cruelly cut short. The details of her passing are heart-wrenching, and out of respect for Linda and her loved ones, we'll refrain from the graphic specifics. Suffice to say, it was a brutal act that left the entire city reeling. When Linda's body was found later that day, the fear that had been simmering in Portsmouth reached a boiling point. The beast of Buckland had struck again, and this time he had gone too far. The police were under immense pressure to solve the case quickly. The public was demanding answers, justice for Linda, and assurance that their streets were safe again. Little did they know that in their rush to close the case, they were about to make a mistake that would change another young life forever. As news of Linda's tragic fate spread, the city mourned. Flowers appeared on Mary Row, candles were lit in windows, and Linda's smiling face looked out from every newspaper. She wasn't just another statistic. She was a daughter, a friend, a familiar face behind the bar. Her loss was felt deeply by all who knew her and even by those who didn't. As the investigation into Linda's passing intensified, the police cast a wide net. They questioned locals, interviewed potential witnesses, and combed the area for clues. But it was a chance encounter at a nightclub that would set the wheels of justice and injustice in motion. Enter Michael Shirley, an 18-year-old able seaman in the Royal Navy. Young, full of life, and serving aboard HMS Apollo, Michael was just starting his naval career. On the night Linda lost her life, Michael had been out enjoying Portsmouth's nightlife, unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. Michael's evening started at Joanna's, a popular South Sea nightclub. There, he met a local woman named Dina Fogg. When the club closed, they shared a taxi, with Dina saying she needed to pick up her child from her mother's place. But in a twist of fate, Dina had no intention of spending more time with Michael. She sneakily left through another exit, leaving Michael waiting in the taxi. Realizing he'd been tricked, a frustrated Michael paid the fare and set off on foot, hoping to find Dina. He spent about 10 minutes looking around before giving up and heading back to his ship. According to Michael, he caught another taxi at 1:23 a.m. and was back aboard HMS Apollo by 1:45 a.m. 2 days later, Michael bumped into Dina again. They had a brief chat, during which the recent tragic event came up. Dina later described this conversation as intimidating, a detail that would come back to haunt Michael. At this point, Michael was just another sailor, going about his duties. He spent his Christmas leave with his family in Leamington Spa, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. But on January 5, 1987, everything changed. Michael made another visit to Joanna's. Unbeknownst to him, Dina Fogg was there too, along with a police detective. In a moment that would alter the course of Michael's life, Dina pointed him out as the man she'd been with on the night of Linda's passing. Just like that, Michael Shirley, a young man with his whole life ahead of him, found himself at the center of a murder investigation. He was arrested on the spot, his dreams of a naval career evaporating in an instant. As Michael was led away in handcuffs, he couldn't have known that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume the next 16 years of his life. The case against Michael Shirley was built on 4 main points, like pieces of a puzzle. But as we'll see, this puzzle had some serious flaws. First up was the shoe print. The person who harmed Linda had left a mark from their right shoe on her body. It was a size 43 to 45 shoe with a special flash pattern on the bottom. Michael had a pair of size 44 shoes just like that. Sounds pretty damning, right? Well, not so fast. It turns out that in 1986 alone, about 9,000 pairs of these shoes were sold in the UK, with 250 pairs in Portsmouth. That's a lot of potential suspects. Next was the blood type match. The evidence from Linda's body matched Michael's blood type, O positive. But here's the kicker. 23 out of every 100 men in Britain have this blood type. That's nearly a quarter of the male population. Then there were some healing scratches found on Michael when he was arrested. The prosecution said they were about 4 weeks old, fitting the time of Linda's passing, but Michael said he got them while serving in Barbados in October. Plus, Linda's long fingernails were unbroken, suggesting she hadn't scratched her attacker. Lastly, there was a missing half hour in Michael's story. The prosecution claimed there was a 30-minute gap in his account of that night, just enough time to have harmed Linda. But this relied on some shaky timing from Dina Fogg's statement. The prosecution also tried to paint Michael as someone trying to make up a fake story. They said his brief chat with Dina 2 days after that night was him trying to create an alibi. They even made a big deal about him calling Dina Sue, which was actually the name she had given him. Despite how weak these points were, Michael was found guilty on January 28, 1988. The jury only took about 6.5 hours to decide. Just like that, at 18 years old, Michael was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. But Michael knew he was innocent. He wasn't going to just accept this. He tried to appeal right away, but in May 1989, his appeal was turned down. The judge said there were no lingering doubts about Michael's guilt. In 1992, Michael did something drastic. He stopped eating for 5 whole weeks. Can you imagine not having any food for over a month? He was trying to get people to pay attention to his case. It worked a little bit. People started talking about him. Then Michael did something even crazier. He climbed up on the prison roof. He stayed up there for a couple of days. Those couple of days on the roof were my only nights out in 16 years, Michael later joked. He only came down when the prison agreed to let a journalist named Neil Humber talk to him. Neil Humber was one of the first people who believed Michael was innocent. He found some big problems with the story that helped put Michael in prison. But even with this new information, the authorities weren't listening. So, in January 1993, Michael stopped eating again. This time, he didn't eat for 42 days. That's really dangerous and shows how desperate he was. Finally, the Home Office, that's like the big bosses of the police, said they might look at his case again if they got new evidence. But it wasn't that simple. In 1995, Michael asked the Home Office again to look at his case. The Home Secretary, a really important person in the government, said no. All this time, Michael was kept in special prisons for the most dangerous criminals. Why? Because he wouldn't say he did something he knew he didn't do. The prison people thought he was in denial, but as Michael's lawyer said, he is not in denial, he denies committing the crime. One big problem was that the police had gotten rid of a lot of the evidence from the case. They said they couldn't do new tests because everything was gone. But then, in 2001, they suddenly found some evidence in a drawer. And in 2002, they found even more. James Plaskett, an important politician said in 2002. This long delay has imposed an intolerable strain on Michael and his family. The system failed in the original trial, and it has been decidedly sluggish in helping him clear his name. Michael's fight for freedom was like a roller coaster, lots of ups and downs, but he never gave up hope. He knew the truth was out there, and he was determined to find it, no matter how long it took. As the years ticked by, Michael Shirley's case seemed like a lost cause to many, but sometimes the most unexpected things can change everything. In this case, it was a tiny bit of science that would turn the whole story upside down. Remember how the police said they'd lost all the evidence? Well, it turns out they hadn't. In 2001, they'd found a small glass slide with some important stuff on it. This wasn't just any old slide. It was a key to unlocking the truth. You see, since Michael had been put in prison, scientists had come up with some pretty amazing new ways to look at evidence. One of these was called DNA profiling. It's like a super detailed fingerprint, but for your whole body. It's really good at showing who was at a crime scene and who wasn't. When they tested the slide using this new DNA science, guess what they found? The DNA didn't match Michael Shirley at all. It was like finding out that the shoe everyone thought fit Cinderella actually belonged to someone else entirely. This was huge news. It meant that the stuff found on Linda Cook's body couldn't have come from Michael. He simply couldn't have been the person who hurt her. With this new information, Michael's lawyers went back to court. They said, "Look, we have proof now. Michael didn't do this." And finally, after 16 long years, people started to listen. In 2003, Michael's case went to the Court of Appeal. This is a special court that looks at cases again if there might have been a mistake. And boy, had there been a mistake. The judges looked at the new DNA evidence and realized something had gone very wrong. They decided that Michael's conviction wasn't safe. In other words, they couldn't be sure if he had done anything wrong at all. So on July 3, 2003, something amazing happened. The court said Michael Shirley was not guilty. Just like that, after 16 years, Michael was a free man. This was a really big deal. It was the first time in the UK that a court had changed its mind about someone being guilty because of new DNA evidence. It showed everyone how important this new science could be in making sure the right people were punished for crimes. Michael walked out of court that day a changed man. He had gone in as a teenager and come out in his mid-30s. He had lost so much time, but he had never lost hope. And now, finally, everyone knew the truth. Michael Shirley was innocent. Michael Shirley's release from prison was a moment of triumph, but it also opened up a whole new chapter in the Linda Cook case. The real person who harmed Linda was still out there, and now the police had to start their search all over again. This time, they had a powerful new tool, the same DNA evidence that had freed Michael. They began the painstaking process of comparing this DNA to samples from other possible suspects. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but they were determined to find justice for Linda. Meanwhile, Michael was trying to piece his life back together. Imagine trying to catch up on 16 years of changes. He had to learn how to use new technology, find a job, and rebuild relationships with family and friends. It wasn't easy, but Michael's strength, the same strength that had kept him going in prison, helped him face these new challenges. The police's renewed investigation into Linda's case continued for years. They looked at old evidence with new eyes, re-interviewed witnesses, and followed up on leads that had been overlooked before. But despite their efforts, the case remained unsolved. This left a bittersweet feeling for many people in Portsmouth. On one hand, an innocent man had been freed. On the other, Linda's family and friends still didn't have closure. The community was left with mixed emotions, relief that a wrongful conviction had been corrected, but frustration that the real culprit remained at large. Michael's case became a powerful example of why it's so important to keep looking for the truth, even when everyone thinks they already know what happened. It showed how new scientific techniques, like DNA testing, can shed light on old cases and sometimes reveal surprising truths. The story of Linda Cook and Michael Shirley also sparked important conversations about the justice system. People started asking tough questions. How can we make sure this doesn't happen again? What other safeguards do we need to prevent innocent people from being wrongly convicted? As the years passed, Michael continued to adjust to life outside prison. He became an advocate for others who claimed they were wrongly convicted, using his experience to help them fight for justice. His stories serve as a reminder that behind every headline, every conviction, there are real people whose lives are forever changed. The Linda Cook case remains one of the most notorious unsolved mysteries in Portsmouth's history. It's a story that reminds us that the pursuit of justice is ongoing, that we must always be willing to question what we think we know, and that sometimes the truth can take a very long time to come to light.